Hi, everybody. So a few years ago, I was the Mac guy for a little company called NBC. We had a small office space behind crypto locks that nobody else could get into because we were the only Macs on the whole Burbank campus. On all of Burbank and NBC, there was only one small group. However, I got traded out to, every now and then, to those couple of executives who secretly had Macs on their desktop in NBC because rank has its privileges. In the years since then, I think we've seen a lot more Macs, OS X especially, in the enterprise, and that's what this panel is going to talk about, Macs in the enterprise. So, John Gallant.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I know it's raining out, but we can do better than that. Hi, everyone. I love that. That was beautiful. So in my role as Chief Content Officer at IDG, I work with the editorial teams of all of our websites and publications, and that ranges from the consumer publications like Macworld, PC World, Tech Hive, which is a consumer lifestyle site, and we have, I probably shouldn't tell you here, but we just launched Greenbot for the Android world. And then I also work with the editors-in-chief at our enterprise publications like CIO, Computer World, Network World, InfoWorld, all of those. So we see Apple from a variety of different perspectives, from the pure consumer perspective all the way up to the viewpoint of a CIO who, whether they wanted it or not, has now got Apple as a strategic provider, even if maybe Apple doesn't view itself as a strategic provider to enterprise. So our goal this morning is to talk to some folks from the enterprise about what they need from Apple. And we're going to look at not only Macs in the enterprise, but also the growing preponderance of iOS devices that companies are partially dealing with, which I actually hate the whole BYOD thing, because I think it's a moment in time. And more importantly, looking to capture the value of these powerful capabilities and really transform the business. So we're going to talk to some folks up here. We have a great panel who are going to share their thoughts on what Apple could do better to help the enterprise really maximize the value of Apple technologies in the enterprise environment. And I'm going to ask our panelists to just spend one moment telling us about themselves rather than me reading a bio of them, just a little bit about their perspective and how they come at this issue. And we're going to start with Ben Bajarin, who's a principal with Creative Strategies. Ben, welcome. And like on Jeopardy, tell us about yourself.
So my name's Ben Bajarin. I'm an industry analyst with a firm called Creative Strategies. So we study industry trends, market trends. We study companies. We've focused on Apple ever since their inception. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about them from many different angles. But we look broadly at the big picture of what's happening in global markets, both consumer and enterprise and servers and cloud and whatnot. So from a big picture perspective and kind of who's doing what and why is really where we spend a lot of our time studying markets and thinking.
Great. And next to Ben is Jeff Cary, who's an enterprise architect with that little company that Dan mentioned called Chevron, which I think you've probably invested more in some projects than our company has made in the last 10 years. So Jeff, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff Cary. I'm an enterprise architect for our end user computing asset. This is the area where we do our standard operating desktops and our mobile solutions and our unified communications and collaborations and email messaging and those types of things. And most of my conversation today will be oriented around the mobile space, the iOS platform, because that's where we're really making our biggest pushes.
Great. And next to Jeff is the CIO from San Francisco, a native, and that's Marc Touitou. Marc, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Well, I'm Marc Touitou. I'm the CEO of San Francisco. And the big challenge for us in the city is to make technology more efficient for government, for the greater benefit of our citizens. And we have a number of different agencies or business units from SFPD to a hospital. So we have plenty of different business models to support, and I look forward to leveraging the Apple world to that effect.
It's great. So in addition to taking some questions from the audience closer to the end, what I want to cover with folks today is what's missing in the Apple product set? What's missing in the way Apple deals or doesn't deal with the enterprise? What would folks like to see coming out from Apple in the future? But before we do that, I thought we'd put a stake in the ground and really look at Apple in the context of other strategic enterprise providers. When people think of those companies, they think of the IBMs, the HPs, the Dells, the Oracles. But as I said, with the preponderance of these devices in the enterprise today, Apple is a strategic provider. And I wonder if each of you could kind of give me a letter grade in terms of what you think of Apple as an enterprise provider today. Ben, we'll start with you. We'll go right down the line.
So I think prior to their latest updates, I might have given them a little lower grade, but I think they did some very interesting things, both from a philosophical standpoint and some of their latest upgrades and modifications to the IT program. So, I'd probably give them a B-ish now. I think Apple's an interesting company in that I don't think they really started off thinking enterprise-wise the same way that Microsoft has, and now, without question, they're having to do so, and I know this is a priority, just the questions that we get from them about enterprise space. But I think this is a company still in modifying, and you look at the baby steps that they've made, and I think that's encouraging, because it's not like they're saying, hey, we don't care about this market at all, but I think that it comes back into their philosophy of how they do integration and product planning from a roadmap standpoint. So I think they're getting better, they've done better, but they're also bringing their philosophy to IT, which is very different than the way Microsoft sort of just brought technologies to IT.
Jeff, that resonate with you?
Somewhat. I give them a mixed grade. And like I said, mostly I come from the iOS space, and it's about the mobile platform. That Chevron has 100,000 desktops out there, and the Mac platform itself on the desktop, laptop area is still under 1,000 and stuff. So we're 20,000 deep into the iOS platform, though, and that's where most of our initiatives lie. In that regard, they're great for actually doing what BlackBerry was doing. BlackBerry had full device encryption. We could use certificates to do that and keep ourselves as secure as we were used to be. And as far as building great hardware and great software and meeting those requirements, it's a top-notch grade kind of thing. In terms of what they've been able to do with the enterprise ecosystem since and how they've evolved it, I don't think that they've made as much progress as I would have liked to have seen them.
Good, and we'll talk some more about that and find out what you mean there. Mark, what's your grade for Apple in the enterprise?
A D at best.
Mark, don't sugarcoat it.
No, I think that if I were an Apple salesperson, I would probably be tempted to say, hey, why bother educating CIOs or lobbying? Well, Microsoft is doing that very well, because our natural customers, they know we're the best. We've conquered the consumers, so don't need to focus on enterprise, which is why I don't know my account exec at Apple in San Francisco. I mean, it's not his or her fault. It's just that there's the expectation from Apple that, everybody knows what we do and who we are. The problem with that, and that's why I give at best a D, is that if you don't take care of CIOs that do not know what they can do with the Apple platforms, then you leave the market share available for all the other well-trained enterprise exec that take care of their corporate teams in the companies.
Yeah. So let's dive more deeply into some of the things that you brought up. Ben, you brought up lately Apple has seemed more enterprise focused. They've changed volume purchasing, the way companies can buy. They've been more explicit with information about how you manage and secure devices. They seem to be at least sharing more information about these things, and they seem to be listening. Are these the right steps now, or are there other steps the company needs to take? I'm asking you, but I'm asking everyone on the panel as well.
Well, I think in this category in general, and in really every segment, there's always more you can do. I mean, I think that's true of anybody providing solutions to the enterprise, and Microsoft included. And I think, again, the difference that I think a lot of CIOs and CTOs struggle with is Apple has a philosophy of the way they like to do things, and that doesn't always translate well into that process that IT managers have been. I mean, I started my career in IT at Cypress Semiconductor, and so I spent a lot of time looking at that in a very Windows environment. There's a very refined process of how things get done there, and Apple sort of has always had this, we think might be a better way to do it, and that might or may not be true, but that's how they bring products to the market. So I think that there's sort of that philosophical element that's fitting in, and so you could debate, okay, well, how should they then tweak this philosophy with, again, I think a very important business to them, especially on the iOS side. I think this is a space that they are very, very keen to make sure that they take market share on. But I do think there's something that they're doing that's actually very interesting, that they do have a competitive advantage on that I think gets overlooked, and that's security. And one of the things, and I think this is particularly true of iOS, is that you look at 64-bit, and my background's also in semiconductors, and you look at all of the perf advancements that come with 64-bit, and encryption is the largest single bit of performance that you see on 64-bit than anything else I could tell you. Decode, encode, open a web page, I mean, apps, you name it. The biggest advancement for 64-bit in terms of performance is in encryption. And that, I think, is a very, very big deal, because Apple's, and if you keep in mind that they're also in a position to control their own silicon as they do, since they designed their own architecture for ARM, and that may very well make its way into Macs as well. They're in a unique opportunity to deeply encrypt security all the way down to the hardware level. And if you saw their new documents, that they actually did a lot more detail of what goes into the vault and around Touch ID. These are all things I think they're going to integrate across platform, because I do think security is going to be a big issue, not just for consumers, but obviously for enterprise customers. And I think they're in a very unique position to do things in that space that no one else can.
Yeah.
I think they're absolutely right in terms of that encryption capability, and the security that they're building into it is great. However, the ecosystem that they've built and the purity with respect to usability and those types of things, everything that they're famous for, right?
Right.
And that in the enterprise space, you need more flexibility. It's not all the same in that. And sometimes I would say I see the product teams or the account managers kind of using some of that, we're not going to make those changes because it's not going to fit with our usability model and those types of things. And sometimes I think they're absolutely right, and most of the time they're right. But sometimes you can see them using it as a crutch sometimes too, is that we're not really ready to make those kind of changes and stuff. And they're enterprise players, and they're starting to engage us with their account teams at an enterprise level. And they're showing some experience in terms of the conversation and language that they use when they engage us and stuff. But in terms of the behaviors behind the back office, in terms of what the product teams do and how they manage those priorities and those portfolios of managing the global enterprise customers, they're still learning in that area.
Yeah. Talk.
Yeah, I too come from the semiconductor nano world. Spent last 10 years as a CIO of a Dutch firm that take care of this, and I confirm what you say. My grade on the strategy to the enterprise is one thing, but you cannot deny that the superiority of the platform and possibly the operating system as well. A lot of people say that nothing runs Windows like a Mac Pro. That's what I use. But and also, I'll tell you that for the ability to resolve business problems, I shared with you that when I discussed with the SFPD chief, Mr. Greg Sir, he told me, Mark, the number one problem for me, number one theft is smartphones in San Francisco, and that's an issue. So anything that you guys can do to lobby the players. And who was the first to respond to this? It was Apple, when they issued their biometric and the ability to locate remote wipe and things like that. Security-wise, it's not only the platform; it's also in that case, the leadership of Apple trying to influence. So on that one, I would give a much better grade.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the characteristics of Apple, or at least one of the things that people say all the time about Apple, is that they have this walled garden approach where they control the experience and the technology end to end. Jeff, am I hearing from you, and Ben a little bit from you, is that something that needs to change with the enterprise, because the enterprise has to support a more heterogeneous mix of things?
Well, I think we benefit on both sides from learning from each other, and Ben made that point earlier in the sense that the purity of which they design applications and hardware and that is great examples for enterprises in terms of how they build digitized platforms and do their platforms internally and stuff. We need to be thinking more along those lines. And I love in the mobile space, you know, the enterprise has been famous for building these large, complex, monolithic applications that just load up the system incredibly. And the beauty of the mobile space is the simplicity of the transactions that they're trying to do and the effect it has on workflow and those types of things. So I really love that walled garden, that pure sense in terms of, hey, this is the way you really need to be thinking. And it's going to take a while, but the enterprises are starting to catch on to that as well in terms of their design and building applications in the mobile space and doing those types of things. I love the walled garden from a security perspective, and that part is great. I don't really want to compromise that. In large enterprises, there's nothing more important than reliability and security of those devices. The second your workflows stop, you start losing money, right? So you want these things to work really well, and so a bit of a blended mix as well on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're on the cusp still. I mean, you know, again, if you look at what's happened just the past decade with the PC market maturity, and then again, what's happening now with smartphones, you know, and even tablets globally, I still think we're in very early stages of this as we sort of make this big shift. You know, in the big growth of the PC sector, it was all enterprise, and we all knew, you know, Microsoft had won that battle, and now we have very new, interesting dynamics that I think will still change and shift themselves over the next 5 years. But there's one thing I think, you know, and we think a lot about ecosystems, which, you know, some people will call walled gardens, but we talk about them as ecosystems. And one of the things that I think is still an opportunity is, again, this notion of identity, you know. And so if I have my work identity and I have my home identity and I have maybe even elements of that are my, you know, parts of my personal identity, there's going to need to be ways to manage and perhaps even separate those things. And again, that's where I think Apple, being a very vertically integrated company, has an opportunity to do some unique new things in identity that we haven't seen before across mobile devices as well as their desktop devices. But I think without question, the trick with the enterprise is that most likely, you know, and again, unless you're at Google or you're somewhere in the valley and all they run is Macs and these types of things, you're going to have a heterogeneous environment. And Apple, I think, has to accept that. And to some degree, as we've sort of given recommendations to them and a number of other firms, this is also true even in your home. You know, I mean, how many of you have a pure Apple home? I mean, you might, but most consumers have a blended mix of these things. And I think this idea of how far a walled garden can go and how well it may play with other ecosystems, but still have differentiated advantage, is something that Apple and really others are going to have to go through. But I do think this idea of identity could play into it, so that it knows who I am, where I'm at. Again, maybe Touch ID can play into that, but I've got a work silo, I've got a life silo, a personal silo, however I do it, but sort of bringing identity more into this mix might be a way to balance those types of things.
Makes sense. So what I want to do is I want to look at two big aspects of Apple. One is the current product set, and talk to you about what's missing there. What do you need from Apple when you look at that current product set? And then we'll talk about doing business with Apple, which is a whole separate thing. So let's talk about the products today, and I'll leave it open to any one of you to launch into this. What would make them a better platform for development for your company? What would make them easier to manage, easier to secure, easier to deploy? What's missing from the current set of Apple offerings as it relates to your use of them in the enterprise?
Well, you know, there are two things that I'd like to mention. One is the culture of the company. You know, it's like the secrecy around product roadmap. It's hindering our a good relationship because we don't understand for sure where they're going. It's just trust me, we'll be there on time. But when you compare that to other large firms that take you to their labs, the corporate labs, and say, okay, guys, we're going to open our drawers, and you sign a non-disclosure or whatever, and we'll show you what the next 5-7 years look like,
right,
and how you can plan in that direction. Because sometimes, I mean, enterprise architects know that when you start a strategy, whether in government or not, you know, it takes a while to structure things and lay it out. So that's one. Whatever Apple can do to be less secretive without,
right,
you know, giving away stuff, you know, just help us collaborate on the strategy. That's one.
So what's missing there is any insight into the roadmap from Apple.
Yeah. Yeah, we know, and unless you are inside in the nano world where you kind of know what's
Ben can probably
what's
tell you
cooking.
this stuff.
Well, I do, but for the average enterprise team that is trying to just figure out what the future looks like, that's not easy.
Okay.
And then there are the opportunities to capitalize on what they do very well. You know, the user experience there's nothing like the user experience for Apple users. So what if we could have for a corporate IT group the leverage of the App Store. So if we could use the App Store as we know it with the versioning that they do very well and the release, and use that in the enterprise to just deploy apps in the company, that would be pretty cool. That's a fantastic opportunity for them to articulate a strategy.
That's great. What else? What's missing in the product set?
Well, boy, I can almost do a whole hour on this kind of one. But, I think for Chevron, the unique thing that we're doing within the iOS mobile platform is that we don't use IDs and passwords in Chevron, and I would certainly encourage the whole industry to try to move away from this if they can. It's kind of a mantra that we need to get away from. There's way too much data out there that's just protected by IDs and passwords. So we put a certificate in the iPhones and iPads, and it authenticates to get in that way. As far as getting into our back-end systems, we use that certificate through a reverse proxy so that it can do an on-behalf of authentication to our Windows AD infrastructure, and then do an on-behalf of authentication and carry forward a Kerberos proxy, the token, to authenticate into the back-end systems and things. What I'd really like to see is that, you know, this kind of complexity when we have these highly secure environments is that the Androids, the Apples of the world all need to be thinking about interfacing with those environments in much more native ways. You know, everybody in enterprises that has to engineer their way around problems by putting in middleware components and things, all this does is add complexity and unreliability to these environments, and it's the antithesis of what we really need to be doing. So I'd like for them to be thinking a little bit more about the identity access management space and how these mobile platforms that are on non-trusted networks and might be semi-trusted devices and might have semi-trusted people behind them authenticate into these back-end systems and get access to enterprise information. And then the second thing that's kind of important to us is encrypted email. The platforms can do encrypted email, but they're not doing it in a way that's actually usable for us, and that's definitely high on my priority list. And I'd also like to make the point that when it comes to iOS and mobile and stuff, everybody gets excited about personal productivity and the app stores and those types of things. But for large enterprises, it's primarily about workflow. And that in a large complex company like ours, we have drill ships, we're drilling, we're lifting oil, we're transporting oil, we're refining it, we're marketing it, and there are tens of thousands of workflows in those processes. And we need to basically go beyond that with the mobile space and into those workflows and find things that say, how do you make that thing that takes 3 hours take only 30 minutes, or 30 minutes to 3 minutes? Or how do you improve the decision quality at the point in time that that individual is making the decision in that workflow? And to do that, and those workflows require things like multi-user capabilities on a device. When you're on a tanker and you've got a guy who's got the material management or the maintenance material documentation, and he's performing maintenance on the engine and things, he's just a shift worker. He may need to move that device from his hands to the next shift worker's hands, and they might want access to a different set of email, and it needs to still be secure in that way, similar to what we do in the PC platforms and things. It's a big ask, but it's really where I think they ought to be going.
That's great. Ben, what's missing today? What do you think is missing?
Well, I mean, I talked a little bit about it, and I think this concept of identity is going to go a long way. And you know, this is really where I think, again, Apple's sort of vertical integrated stack can actually become very interesting. You know, one of the things when we look at this that I'm sort of always conflicted about when I look at both consumer markets and enterprise markets is we've really never seen a company do both of those very well at massive scales. And yet at the same time, we measure platform install bases, and Apple does not have 1 billion customers, but Android does and Microsoft does. So I think this is where they need to get to this billion, sort of installed base. They need to have this customer base and grow it. I think the enterprise plays a key role of that. And that's really where I think, how can they balance these two sort of unique ecosystems? And that's where I think identity can come into play. Because if they lock encryption, again, all the way down, and I can use my fingerprint to say, okay, now I'm on the ship, or now I'm in my work environment, and I get this entirely different experience based on where I'm at in that context, and separate those things from more personal parts, that gives the enterprise, you guys, the ability to say, yes, I trust that environment, that when you're here, you're you, and when you're home, you're not necessarily interfacing or have those rights. And that's really where I think the customization can come in. Because like I said, we've never seen a company both exceed and dominate the enterprise and consumer markets the way that I think Apple can. It's going to be very challenging, but I think emphasis on security and identity, and then again, obviously listening to their customers, doing these customer panels, those types of things I think are critical, because that should affect their roadmap as well.
Right. I'd couple identity and access management a little bit together as well. You got to have that identity, but as soon as you move into what do you want to access, your whole back-end infrastructure around access management and your security architecture there takes over.
Yeah, and I'll throw in something that's always somewhat a little bit unpopular to talk about, but I do think there's some pricing things that they can do as well. I mean, I think once you start, and when you look at even just interviews with Tim Cook, and I think, I've heard Steve Jobs say this as well, that there's an experience that they want to deliver, and it's a matter of what's the price to deliver that. And there's ways to bring that down. There really are. I mean, and that's why I said it could be very interesting if they did bring their ARM custom SoC process to Macs. Could be very, very interesting for the Mac hardware platform, and even bring its cost down and open up brand new doors. But Apple is a hardware and a software company equally, and they're also now becoming a services company. And they will have to do all three of those things equally well, and they're doing those for consumer environments, and I think they've got a massive amount of work to do in services to the enterprise, let alone the consumer market.
So I wanted to ask about one issue that comes up with a number of our readers, which is how operating systems are upgraded, and it's pretty much driven by Apple. Is that something that you need more control over as an enterprise? Because that's a big thing in the Microsoft world, is people staging and rolling back and having all those capabilities of telling people like me when you're getting an upgrade. It's different in that environment. Is that a concern for you?
It hasn't been yet, but it certainly could be, right? The fact that you deliver an update, and if you make it a minor point release and it doesn't break anything, you're always good to go. You do a major release and it upgrades. When you start loading up thousands of applications and make workflows dependent on this stuff, and you do an upgrade and you're going to break something, so it's definitely an issue. But there's a few ways to skin the cat, in that you could give them advance notice more of what's coming in the pipeline.
Right.
Have more visibility into the strategic roadmaps, which I think Marc made a point about. And the other thing is that if you're not going to do that, you might need to give that control of when enterprises deploy to them.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
Well, I tend to agree with the fact that silence is beauty. So I haven't had any problem with that. It usually works. So if it didn't, you'd want more options. Say, no, don't disturb me now. I'm in front of a customer. I don't want to be logged for 2 hours. But whether it's on the Apple TV at home or on the mobile devices, it's not been a concern yet. I'm just wondering, we debate between us, how can Apple do better to engage enterprises, but are we even sure that they care? Do they want to? I mean, is it just us,
Well, the beauty of this is I'll let you guys answer your own question.
Right.
Well, I know that in the most recent earnings call, for example, that enterprise came up a lot in that earning call. Both we're talking about the level of penetration of different devices in the enterprise, not specific revenue figures associated with that, but it clearly seemed to be on the mind of Tim Cook. I'll let you answer your own question, yes or no. Do you think Apple cares about the enterprise?
Well, we'll see. It's a candid question. I'm not being smart here.
You're just being a troublemaker here. That's what you're being.
No, well, we'll see if there's a strategy to engage execs and different people. But I also wonder on the strategic direction, when you see the latest acquisitions for mind-boggling numbers of $19 billion for one and $900 million for the other one, Viber and WhatsApp. we should have thought of that before and create an app like this. But when you think of the cloud direction, I'd like to know more about what Apple is doing on the cloud strategy. It kind of de facto, I mean, it happens. You know, they have their cloud, they have the network. If you know your colors on the iPhone, you know when you're chatting and when it's for free or not. But I'm very intrigued by the direction that they are going to take. I would love to sign an NDA and go to their corporate labs and be told more, and how to leverage that in the enterprise, the cloud, the telco aspect of things, and the size that you have when you store things. Do you have your contacts and your mail? People do Dropbox or whatever. So what do you put as an enterprise? What do you put in the cloud? How much? For what cost?
So it's great. I mean, that's a perfect segue. It was a question I was going to ask. When you think beyond the device and the operating system, what else is missing from Apple? They're not particularly, the cloud offerings they have are not enterprise-oriented today. The apps are not particularly enterprise-oriented today. What else would you like to see from them on that front?
Well, I think the weakest part of their story is the cloud story, and I think this is a company trying to evolve into a services company, and I think it's incredibly important that they do. I mean, if you look at the history of our industry, the value chain has always swung and ended in services, and so this is something I think that they have to be super focused on. But again, I think one of the challenges that they have is that they do think about, this is the sort of walled garden approach, and one of my biggest frustrations both from a consumer standpoint and with enterprises is that they still think about their ecosystem as an island. It's you and it's your devices and it's your personal cloud. And I think that has to evolve to say, no, it could be our devices and our cloud. And you see this right now in family environments. How difficult is it for you to share media, right, with your family without either emailing a photo to someone or just breaking down, because they think about it. They think about this is you and this is your personal devices and your personal cloud and you're an island. And the bottom line is those islands mesh together. And I think there's a lot of work and services that can go both in enterprises, we call these things communal clouds, the evolution from a personal cloud to a communal cloud, and have this hardware, software services strategy now blend well so that it's not just an island into of itself, but it works together with other things. And I think this is them, again, evolving into being this type of company. And one of the things that that I know that's very interesting is that Apple is severely understaffed for where they need to go. And this is the reason that they are trying to acquire every other building that they can around the Cupertino area and even beyond into Sunnyvale. I mean, I'm seeing these things show up anywhere. But if you go to Apple's campus, you literally can't park. People are parking in the middle of the street in infinite loop because they can't park. So Apple has a serious staffing problem. But to your earlier point,
parking problem or staffing?
Well, it's parking and staffing. I mean, they've got a parking problem, but they've got to hire a lot more people, really. This is why, to the earlier question on whether enterprises should be able to control when they deploy things, iOS 7 was really buggy, and I think that had a direct result of them just not having all of the massive engineering that they needed to do these things. So again, I think they know what they need to do. They've got a severely understaffed problem for all the things they need to do, and so that's kind of injuring these things. But one of my concern with iOS 7, for example, when it came out, was that it's, as you guys pointed out, it's just going to take one time where it doesn't work, that you'll be like, all right, now I can't do this again. I can't deploy the day it comes out. And that's what my biggest fear is, that happens, and you kind of see it's just going to take one before the dominoes fall.
But there's I'm not sure if it's the subject of an entire other panel, but Apple is a player, a massive player, could be a much more influential player in fields that we care about. If you think of what happened this year on net neutrality, which I thought personally was a disaster, and we know that Apple wants to make a play well, I'm not sure if we know that, but we know that they want to make a play in TVs, and I thought for a while they would buy Netflix or things like that, but they are in a leadership position and in a mass position to influence the directions of other players, including telco or government, and to lobby in the right direction, and I hope they do. I hope they do. Because some of the deals we've seen to mitigate the net neutrality, I don't think us as consumers should rejoice on that.
So I'm going to ask a question about doing business with Apple, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. And we've got mics in the middle, but I'm sure I can hear you and repeat it if you don't feel like striding to the middle of the room. Let's talk about everything else from Apple, whether it's licensing policies, payment, how you buy things from them, how they sell to you, if they sell to you, and I'd love to hear how they do or don't. The process of doing business with the company, what's good, bad, could be improved.
Well, when it comes to sort of strategic relationships with our vendors in the enterprise, right? Not all of them are strategic, but let's hypothetically say they are a strategic player at this point because there's so much in the mobile space that we're looking to take advantage of. I kind of have a standard line with a lot of the account managers and with our suppliers in the sense that I go, you know, we can meet every 3 months, every 6 months for 2 years and stuff, but along that journey, somewhere in that process, you're usually giving them a hit list of what it is you want. Now, if you give them a laundry list and you never get anything you want because you don't tell them what's important,
right,
then you'll get what you expect, which is nothing, right? But if you say, these are the 2 most important things to us out of this laundry list of 100 things, when 2 years, 3 years go by, you need to see some of those things in those products. You need to see them respond to those kind of capabilities. If they're not, you don't have a strategic relationship. All you're doing is buying stuff off the shelf, which really makes you ask, why am I meeting with these people in the first place? And there's a lot of reasons, the support model and those kinds of things. But you get the point there in that I said earlier that I think that they definitely are putting their front office out there in terms of the enterprise and trying to have relationships like that. I think they got a lot to learn in terms of the back office. When it comes to strategic roadmaps, I don't know, but if you're in the enterprise and you're interfacing with these people, the idea that they're a secretive company and will not tell you what they're working on, I don't know how the enterprise is going to continue to tolerate that. We have huge planning horizons. We need to have some visibility into what's coming down the pipe. So if they want to keep their super secret stuff secret, great. But if they want to, they're going to have to be a little more visible in that regard.
Yeah.
But, and I think that, you know, we're lucky. We're here at Silicon Valley. We have a lot of the top players, and I'm actually just reaching out to this morning to Apple. There, in case they don't know how to do this, you can start pilots, joint project with, say, San Francisco, and you know, we've started to provide, for example, free Wi-Fi in the city, and there are things on the protocols where I don't want to go technical, but basically when your device secures an access point and you start walking on Market Street, then your next access point is over there, but you're still connected. You're still connected to this one. So having a joint partnership, and it's not been done before, so that would be pretty cool. Yeah. You know, to have the handshake to the next access point automatically handling the roaming if you want, or working with us on a hotspot 2.0 that allows us to have like encrypted, secure free Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
These are opportunities for players such as Apple to use their might to accelerate cool things.
That's great. Ben, if you were to isolate kind of the one, aside from the products and the technology, the one thing Apple could do better in doing business with enterprise, what would it be?
Well, I think these guys really mentioned it. We hear it over and over again. It's the both relationship and visibility into strategic planning. And this is something that every major PC OEM does. I mean, Lenovo, Dell, you name it. They sit at HP. They have these long lead councils with Fortune 500 CIOs and CTOs. They show backroom stuff. They get their feedback. It's a very two-way relationship street. And again, that's because I think you've got a much larger focus from your HP and your Dell and others on enterprise than you do from Apple. And this is something that I think they have to adjust because, and again, there's parts of their roadmap that I think are very predictable. And I think what they need is feedback from this new customer base. And, and I think that they do care about it just because I do think the enterprise business use cases are very sticky. They're also very valuable customers, so they're ones that fit right into Apple's build. They won't never be as large as global consumer markets, but over time, there's growth in that space. So I think that how they figure out that sort of relationship bit's going to be the biggest one, because that's their, I mean, there's a number of differences from them and the PC vendors, but that's the biggest one. All the big box PC guys have very long enterprise councils, and it's a joint develop on how they build software, how they integrate services, how they do hardware. And I think those are things that Apple could benefit from in figuring out how to have something like that with, again, not sort of giving away the whole kit and caboodle.
So the risk there, to play devil's advocate, is that's exactly the way to water down the great experience that they provide today.
I mean, again, it depends. I mean, so one of the things that, you know, we work with the Lenovo's and the HPs of the world is they'll actually show product concepts to IT, and they'll say, hey, look, we're thinking about building this type of thing. Does that resonate with you or not? Is it crap? You know, and this is where I think there's a different philosophy within Apple, because again, usually they used to look at something with their teams who are all very good at saying that's a consumer product and saying, let's ship that. Well, they make a lot of different stuff, and there's not really any outside eyeball. And it's going to work for consumer. I mean, consumers is a much easier environment, I think, to grasp and create solutions for. But the PC side, where's the PC going? How does the tablet evolve, especially in enterprise use cases? These, I think, are broader questions. Then, more importantly, software and services, which I think is, again, a unique point for enterprises.
Mark, quick comment on that, then we need to take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. We would like to have like 25,000 iWatch to test in San Francisco, and we'd great.
You are utterly shameless.
We give great feedback. We're very
utterly
good testers.
shameless. Do you want to put your email address up or a shipping address
know
or
where to
anything?
find me.
All right, questions. Who has questions for the panel? Any questions? Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Well, first of all, I was really curious as to why, and I know this has been dead for a long time, but it's been an issue in our IT department with regard to the death of the Xserve. Now they've got this R2D2 looking machine that really doesn't fit in a data center, but we're still wanting to use Mac products as servers. And from a technical standpoint, a lot of us don't trust the Mac Mini as a server, and we don't really like the Mac Pro. Is there any possibility they might bring that back?
Great, Ben, why don't you tackle that one? Good question. Come on, if you know it, tell us.
No, I'm just saying it's hard to even speculate. I would say it's doubtful. Again, at least until a point where they've really got a much more fully mature and fledgling enterprise services group, because again, that hardware for services in server is going to tie directly to that. It's not a big market, unfortunately. You know, I mean, I know how Apple thinks about these things. They like very big markets that they can get good margins on. That's the challenge, and right now, I mean, I think you might want to use it that way. There's people that do it better, but this is where I think if they are evolving to a services company, that would be a play. It's just not going to be a gigantic one from a market size, so that would be why I would say I'm skeptical, just because I know the sizes of those markets.
Great, yes.
I love the discussion, and I agree it's a loaded question. But I just want to, it's more of a comment maybe than a question.
Sure.
University of Utah, Department of Pathology is where I work. We've always struggled, you know, like to get the same thing. How do I interact with Apple? Great, they'll send me a sales guy. Ooh, wait, I have an SE, except he covers all of the Western United States, and he doesn't really help me. So I'm submitting, you know, bug reports and radar reports and open radar reports and trying to, you know, get them to listen. I'm blessed now that I strong-armed my institution to buy into the enterprise contract, and that's what we want. I mean, that is what we need, but I don't think most of us can afford it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that would really help, because it's a whole different experience. Like, I get mails from, you know, from my TAM weekly. Yeah. So the other thing is, it's interesting, is their channels or their Apple's way to deliver the product. You know, you're saying, oh, you just go to the store and buy it off the shelf. In education, we have an education channel, but they're not really represented and supported. And from my perspective, the Apple Store has gone into competition with the education channel. So I've moved away from my local campus vendor because they can't cope. I can drive to my local Apple Store and get better support than I can from the educational channel. So they're competing with each other, and I think that's really unfortunate, because...
Great.
So comments, thanks.
Yeah, Jeff, you were nodding your head. By the way, great mustache and great question and comment. So, what a combo. Jeff, you were nodding your head while he was talking. You agree with that?
Oh yeah, I think it should be noted that the support model for the Apple products, it's still a consumer support model. An enterprise support model doesn't exist, which goes back to what I was saying, that they want to play in the enterprise space, but they're not that good at it yet. They need to they need to look at what others do and not necessarily emulate all the aspects of it, but some of the better aspects of it, they definitely do.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up because our time's almost done. I have a speed question for all of you that I want you to answer, and briefly. The single most important thing you think Apple could do for the enterprise right now, but while you're thinking, I'm actually going to put Ben on the spot. So Ben, I think the challenge for Tim Cook is, everyone, the expectation with Apple is, when is the next game-changing thing coming from Apple? Is there the potential that the enterprise could be the next game-changing thing, that we could see some reorganization or restructuring or really heavy emphasis on that as the future direction?
Yeah, so I'll be brief, although I could spend a long time on that question. I mean, we have pegged the Mac as a growth area. I mean, we look at segments of where growth is happening, and I look at what's happening. It's very volatile, to be honest with you, in the pure PC segment. So I think what they're doing, and that would play in well to an enterprise strategy. I mean, if you want to gain to 25-30% market share of PCs, that's going to be the way you're going to do it. You're not going to necessarily do it through pure consumer channels. So I think that's, again, piggybacking on what they need to do to really focus on the enterprise. But it would have to be seen as that. It would have to be seen that this hardware is a growth strategy in enterprise, that they can get up into that 20-30%, which with those margins would be a huge business for them. Wall Street would love that if that happened. And so I think that is an interesting way to piggyback on, sort of your question, which is that's designed at that sort of a segment. That it could be, I think there's much larger ones that may or may not be around the corner, but if the Mac is a growth segment, I think is going to piggyback on, if there's optimism to that, it's going to come from the enterprise.
Great. All right, Mark, single most important thing Apple could do for the enterprise right now?
Well, the composition of your staff is a direct reflection of your strategic intent. So when I ask my candid question on, well, do we know that they care, there was not a random thing to say. I believe that they are customer focused, but they were customer focused on a certain category of customers. The enterprise customers are a different customer. They did not have focus on this customer yet. So the single most important thing to do is customer focus on that market segment if they do care.
Great. Jeff?
Let's see. I'll be a little selfish here and just say we've been waiting 2 years to get encrypted email capabilities implemented in a way that we can use them and like I said earlier, you asked for this stuff 2 years ago. If you have any sort of relationship, you expect some action in some of these things. So that's the most important thing to our company right now, is to get that encrypted email capability. They have it, they're just not doing it in a way that's usable to us.
Right.
So the other is the multi-user capability. It's not a high priority, but again, if the money in business is in the workflow and you're going to improve the workflows, and it's not just about the knowledge worker now, you're going into the manufacturing environments and things, and you're doing stuff with iPads there, you're going to have this multi-user capability.
Yeah, and I won't dwell on it too long, but you had also mentioned that the pricing certainly doesn't work in certain environments around the world. That pricing can be really a challenge.
If you're a multinational company and you want a BYOD kind of, or bring your own mobile device kind of thing, the cost of these devices in Indonesia and other places are prohibitive for the employees there.
Makes sense. Ben, you get the last word. What's the single most important thing Apple can do for the enterprise right now?
I think it's exactly what those guys said, which is to focus on that customer segment. I mean, any successful company has a relentless focus on their customers. I think they do this with consumers, and again, if they're going to take the enterprise seriously, view it as a growth segment, view it as critical to their long-term business and their ecosystem, they've got to do a lot more to focus on their needs and address those needs.
So you have a great panel when you feel like you have guests over for dinner and they have to leave early and you really don't want them to. What a great panel. Mark, Jeff, Ben, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.